Months after the HOA drama had unfolded, Willow Creek Estates felt like a completely different place. The neighborhood that had once been defined by rigid rules and simmering tensions now buzzed with warmth and camaraderie. Neighbors greeted each other with genuine smiles instead of polite nods, and front yards became gathering spots for spontaneous chats rather than battlegrounds for petty disputes. Evelyn stood at the center of this transformation, not because she sought the attention, but because her quiet determination had set it all in motion. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Evelyn decided to host a neighborhood barbecue, an idea born out of her desire to bring people together in a relaxed, joyful setting. She invited everyone, longtime residents, newcomers, even former critics who had doubted her intentions early on. Marcus helped string up fairy lights around the backyard, while Evelyn prepared platters of grilled chicken and cornbread. The scent of sizzling food wafted through the air, drawing neighbors closer as they arrived carrying dishes of their own. Homemade mac and cheese, spicy jerk chicken, fragrant biryani, and decadent desserts. As guests mingled, laughter filled the space, punctuated by the occasional cheer when someone scored a basket in the impromptu basketball game happening in the driveway. Children darted between tables, chasing each other with water balloons, while adults swapped stories under the shade of tall oak trees. Karen's name wasn't mentioned once. It was as if she'd faded into the background, a distant memory no one felt compelled to revisit. Evelyn took a moment to step back and observe the scene, feeling a swell of pride. She spotted Lisa teaching Ruth how to make guacamole, their heads bent together over a cutting board. Nearby, Mr. Patel chatted animatedly with Greg, the HOA chairperson, about his upcoming trip to India. Even Angela's brother, whose visits had once sparked controversy, was deep in conversation with another neighbor about classic cars. The diversity of faces, voices, and experiences was a testament to the progress they'd made. A neighborhood united not by sameness, but by mutual respect. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the festivities, someone suggested Evelyn say a few words. Reluctantly, she stepped onto the makeshift stage, a wooden pallet-turned platform, and raised her hands to quiet the crowd. "I didn't plan anything fancy," she began, smiling warmly. "But I do want to thank all of you for being part of this journey. None of us are perfect, and neither is this neighborhood. But what makes us strong is our willingness to listen, learn, and grow together." Her words earned hearty applause, followed by a chorus of cheers and whistles. Someone handed her a microphone, prompting her to add, "And remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It takes patience, effort, and sometimes a little courage. If we can keep doing that, if we can keep showing up for each other, then there's nothing we can't achieve." The evening ended with music playing softly in the background, courtesy of a neighbor's portable speaker, and dancing under the stars. Evelyn found herself swaying alongside Marcus, laughing as he spun her around. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace, not just as a homeowner, but as a member of a thriving community. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn continued advocating for fairness and inclusivity, both within Willow Creek and beyond. Her story inspired others to take action in their own neighborhoods, proving that small acts of courage could ripple outward, creating waves of positive change. Though she never considered herself a hero, Evelyn knew she had played a role in something meaningful. Willow Creek Estates wasn't perfect. It likely never would be, but it was better. And for Evelyn, that was enough. The sun was just beginning to rise over Willow Creek Estates, casting a golden glow across the neatly manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges. It was the kind of morning that made life feel peaceful, almost picture-perfect. Dr. Evelyn Carter stood on her porch, sipping a warm cup of coffee as she watched her teenage son, Marcus, shoot hoops in the driveway. The sound of the basketball bouncing against the pavement echoed softly in the quiet neighborhood. For once, everything seemed calm. Evelyn, who spent most of her days navigating the chaos of the city as its police chief, Cherish these rare moments of tranquility. But peace in Willow Creek Estates was about to be disrupted. As Evelyn leaned against the railing of her porch, she noticed a sleek white SUV pulling up to the curb outside her house. The car looked out of place, too polished, too deliberate. Out stepped Karen Whitmore, the infamous HOA Karen of the neighborhood. Clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon, Karen marched toward Evelyn's driveway with an air of authority that bordered on arrogance. Her high heels clicked sharply against the pavement, cutting through the serene morning atmosphere. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, curious about what this unexpected visitor wanted. Karen stopped abruptly, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of Marcus's car parked neatly in the driveway. Without so much as a greeting, she launched into a tirade. "Excuse me," Karen barked, pointing at the car as if it were some sort of crime scene. "This vehicle is violating HOA rules. You can't park here. It's not allowed." Evelyn blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the sheer audacity of the accusation. She set her coffee mug down and stepped forward, her posture relaxed but confident. "Good morning," she said politely, her voice smooth and measured. "I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion. This is my driveway, and my son's car is parked on our property. There's no violation here." Karen scoffed, clearly unimpressed by Evelyn's calm demeanor. "Oh, please," she snapped, waving her clipboard dismissively. "You obviously don't understand how things work around here. The HOA has strict guidelines, and parking like this," she gestured dramatically at the car, "is unacceptable. If you don't move it immediately, I'll have no choice but to issue fines." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, studying Karen with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. She had dealt with difficult people before, angry citizens, stubborn suspects, even hostile colleagues, but something about Karen's tone struck a nerve. It wasn't just the words, it was the underlying attitude, laced with condescension and thinly veiled disrespect. Still, Evelyn kept her cool. "Ma'am," she replied evenly, "I assure you, my family is fully compliant with all HOA regulations. Perhaps we should review the rules together to clear up any misunderstandings." Karen bristled at the suggestion, clearly unused to being challenged. "There's nothing to review," she shot back, her voice rising. "I know the rules better than anyone. And let me tell you, this isn't over. I'll make sure the HOA board hears about this." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed back to her SUV, slamming the door shut behind her as she drove away in a huff. Evelyn stood there for a moment, watching the dust settle in Karen's wake. Marcus jogged over, his basketball tucked under one arm. "Mom, what was that all about?" he asked, looking confused. Evelyn sighed, shaking her head. "Nothing serious," she assured him, though her mind was already turning over the encounter. Something about Karen's behavior didn't sit right. Little did Evelyn know, this confrontation would be the start of something much bigger, a battle that would test her patience, expose deep-seated biases, and ultimately bring change to their quiet suburban community. The encounter with Karen left a bitter taste in Evelyn's mouth, but she wasn't one to let petty drama ruin her day. Still, as she returned to her porch and picked up her coffee mug, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about Karen's behavior had been off. It wasn't just the misplaced accusations or the theatrics with the clipboard. It was the tone, the way Karen seemed to talk down to her, as if Evelyn were someone who needed to be taught a lesson. Evelyn had faced plenty of challenges in her life, both personally and professionally, but there was something uniquely grating about people like Karen, people who wielded power recklessly, without accountability. Marcus, sensing his mom's quiet frustration, tried to lighten the mood. "Well, that was awkward," he said with a chuckle, dribbling the basketball absent-mindedly. "Think she'll actually come back with, like, reinforcements or something?" Evelyn smiled faintly, ruffling his hair. "I doubt it," she replied, though deep down she knew better. People like Karen didn't back down easily. They thrived on conflict, feeding off the chaos they created. Evelyn had seen it before in her line of work. Self-appointed enforcers who believed their authority was absolute, even when it wasn't based on anything real. Later that evening, after Marcus had gone inside to finish his homework, Evelyn decided to dig into the HOA bylaws. She retrieved the thick packet of documents from a drawer in her office, flipping through the pages with a critical eye. The rules were, unsurprisingly, filled with nitpicky details about everything from mailbox colors to lawn maintenance schedules. But when it came to parking, the guidelines were crystal clear. Homeowners were allowed to park vehicles on their own driveways, no questions asked. There was no gray area here, nothing ambiguous or open to interpretation. Evelyn sighed, shaking her head. Karen's accusations weren't just baseless. They were deliberately misleading. As she continued reading, Evelyn stumbled upon something more troubling. Buried within the dense text were vague clauses that gave the HOA sweeping powers over residents' lives. One section mentioned aesthetic standards without defining what those standards actually were, leaving room for subjective judgment calls. Another clause allowed the HOA to impose fines for behavior deemed disruptive to community harmony, a phrase so broad it could mean almost anything. Evelyn frowned, realizing these loopholes could easily be exploited to target specific individuals or families. Her curiosity piqued. Evelyn decided to do a little digging. She reached out to a few neighbors she trusted, casually asking if they'd ever dealt with Karen or heard complaints about the HOA. What she learned shocked her. Several minority families in the neighborhood had reported similar run-ins with Karen, each involving accusations of rule violations that turned out to be unfounded. Some had received threatening letters from the HOA, while others felt pressured into making unnecessary changes to their homes just to avoid conflict. One neighbor confided that Karen had once criticized her for hanging wind chimes on her front porch, claiming they were too loud despite never having made a sound. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. This wasn't just about her driveway anymore. It was about fairness, about standing up against systemic bias masquerading as bureaucracy. She thought about all the times she'd fought for justice in her career, moments when she'd refused to let prejudice go unchallenged. Now, sitting in her quiet suburban home, she realized the fight had followed her here. Karen might think she was untouchable, hiding behind the guise of enforcing rules. But Evelyn knew better. Rules were meant to serve the community, not divide it. And if Karen wanted to play hardball, Evelyn was ready to step up. By the time Evelyn closed the HOA packet, her resolve was firm. She wouldn't let Karen intimidate her or anyone else in the neighborhood. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about setting an example. If Karen wanted a confrontation, she'd get one, but not on her terms. Evelyn smiled to herself, a spark of determination lighting up her eyes. Sometimes peace came not from avoiding conflict, but from facing it head-on. And Evelyn Carter was done backing down. The next morning, Evelyn woke up with a clear plan in mind. She wasn't going to let Karen's baseless threats slide, not when they revealed deeper issues that needed addressing. After a quick breakfast, she sat down at her kitchen table and began drafting a polite but firm response to Karen's accusations. Her tone was professional, almost formal, as if she were writing to a colleague rather than someone who had treated her with such disdain. In the letter, Evelyn outlined exactly why her son's car was parked legally on their property, citing specific sections of the HOA bylaws to back up her claims. She ended the note by inviting Karen, or anyone from the HOA, to clarify any misunderstandings in writing. But Evelyn didn't stop there. She knew firsthand how people like Karen operated. They thrived on intimidation and silence, counting on others to back down rather than push back. So instead of keeping quiet, Evelyn decided to share her experience with a few trusted neighbors. Over coffee later that day, she casually mentioned Karen's visit and showed them copies of the HOA rules. "It's strange," Evelyn said, sipping her latte. "There's nothing in here about what she accused me of, and yet she acted like I was breaking some major law." Her friends nodded sympathetically, sharing their own stories of run-ins with Karen. One neighbor admitted she'd been fined for planting flowers that were deemed too colorful, while another recounted how Karen had complained about his mailbox being slightly crooked. What started as a casual conversation turned into a brainstorming session. The group agreed that Karen's behavior wasn't just annoying. It was part of a pattern targeting minority families in the neighborhood. They decided to document every interaction they'd had with her, gathering evidence of her discriminatory practices. Evelyn offered to help organize their findings, knowing that presenting a united front would carry more weight than individual complaints. By the end of the meeting, everyone felt empowered, ready to stand together against unfair treatment. Meanwhile, Karen wasted no time escalating the situation. True to her word, she filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, complete with exaggerated details about Evelyn's supposed disregard for community standards. According to Karen, Evelyn's actions weren't just a violation of rules. They were a threat to the peaceful ambience of Willow Creek Estates. Emboldened by her self-appointed role as the neighborhood watchdog, Karen even went door to door, rallying support for her cause. "You wouldn't believe what some people think is acceptable around here," she told one neighbor, rolling her eyes dramatically. "It's like they don't care about our community at all." Unbeknownst to Karen, however, her antics were having the opposite effect. As news of her latest crusade spread, more residents began questioning her motives. Some found her accusations laughable, especially after hearing Evelyn's side of the story. Others grew frustrated, tired of living under the shadow of Karen's constant nitpicking. A few even reached out to Evelyn privately, offering their support. "If you need anything," one neighbor texted, "just say the word. We're behind you 100%. By the end of the week, the HOA sent Evelyn a strongly worded letter, reiterating Karen's claims and threatening daily fines unless she complied. Evelyn read the letter with a mixture of amusement and frustration. It was heavy on bluster but light on substance, filled with vague language and thinly veiled threats. She couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Did they really think this kind of scare tactic would work on her? If anything, their overreaction only strengthened her resolve. That evening, Evelyn sat on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Marcus joined her, sensing that something big was brewing. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, tossing a basketball between his hands. Evelyn smiled, her expression calm but determined. "We're going to show them exactly who they're dealing with," she replied, "and maybe teach them a thing or two about fairness along the way." Marcus grinned, clearly impressed. For the first time since Karen's visit, Evelyn felt a sense of excitement. This wasn't just about defending herself anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been unfairly targeted, and she was ready to take on the challenge. Karen's determination to escalate the situation only fueled Evelyn's resolve. The HOA's letter arrived on a Friday afternoon, its tone harsh and accusatory, as if Evelyn had committed some grave offense against the neighborhood. It demanded that she rectify the violation by removing her son's car from the driveway, or face escalating fines starting the following Monday. Evelyn read it twice, shaking her head at the absurdity of it all. She couldn't help but laugh softly. These people really thought they could bully her into submission. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Instead of responding immediately, Evelyn spent the weekend strategizing. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about exposing the flaws in a system that allowed someone like Karen to wield power recklessly. On Sunday evening, she sat down with Marcus and explained what she planned to do. "Sometimes, when people act unfairly, you have to stand up and show them why they're wrong," she told him. "And sometimes, showing them means letting them see exactly who you are." Marcus nodded, his teenage bravado shining through. "So we're calling their bluff?" he asked. Evelyn smiled. "Something like that." On Monday morning, Evelyn made her move. Dressed in her full police uniform, complete with badges, medals, and polished boots, she walked confidently into the monthly HOA meeting. The room fell silent as she entered, every eye turning toward her. Some attendees looked shocked, others confused, and a few seemed almost guilty. Karen, seated near the front, froze mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open like a fish out of water. Evelyn didn't say a word as she took a seat at the center of the room, placing a folder neatly on the table in front of her. Her presence alone commanded attention. When it was finally her turn to speak, Evelyn stood up, her posture tall and commanding. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm but authoritative. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter, and I serve as the chief of police for our city. I'm also a homeowner here in Willow Creek Estates." She paused, letting the weight of her introduction sink in. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and even Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Evelyn continued, opening the folder and pulling out printed copies of the HOA bylaws. "I've reviewed these documents thoroughly, and I can assure you that my family is fully compliant with all regulations. There is nothing in the rules prohibiting my son's car from being parked on our driveway." She then turned her focus to Karen's behavior, addressing it directly without raising her voice or losing her composure. "What concerns me," she said, "is not just this particular incident, but the pattern of targeting minority families in this community. Several of my neighbors have shared experiences of baseless accusations and discriminatory treatment. This isn't about enforcing rules. It's about using those rules as a weapon to intimidate and divide us." The room grew tense as Evelyn spoke, her words hitting their mark. One by one, neighbors began nodding in agreement. Someone whispered, "She's right," while another muttered, "Finally, someone's saying it." Even members of the HOA board exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unprepared for this level of scrutiny. Karen, however, refused to back down. Leaning forward, she stammered, "This has nothing to do with that. I'm just trying to protect our neighborhood." Evelyn fixed Karen with a steady gaze, her expression unreadable. "Protecting a neighborhood should mean fostering unity and fairness," she replied, "not singling people out because of who they are or where they come from." The room erupted into murmurs of agreement, and for the first time, Karen looked genuinely rattled. Her face flushed red as she realized her usual tactics weren't working. When Evelyn finished speaking, the atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. What had started as a routine HOA meeting had become something far more significant, a reckoning. As the meeting drew to a close, Evelyn handed out copies of her research to anyone interested, including documented evidence of Karen's past complaints and their disproportionate impact on minority homeowners. By the time she left, the HOA board was scrambling to address the growing unrest among residents. For Evelyn, it was a small victory, but she knew the real work was just beginning. The fallout from the HOA meeting spread like wildfire through Willow Creek Estates, leaving no corner of the neighborhood untouched. Word of Evelyn's confrontation with Karen traveled fast, fueled by whispers at grocery stores, text messages between neighbors, and even a few dramatic retellings over backyard fences. By Tuesday morning, it seemed everyone knew what had happened, and opinions were divided. Some residents praised Evelyn for exposing the truth, while others quietly grumbled about stirring the pot. But one thing was certain: life in Willow Creek would never be the same. Karen, humiliated and cornered, lashed out in predictable fashion. She began making phone calls to anyone who would listen, spinning her version of events to paint herself as the victim. "Evelyn ambushed me," she told one neighbor, her voice trembling with indignation. "She turned the whole meeting into some kind of personal vendetta against me." To another, she complained, "This isn't about rules, it's about politics. People are just jealous because I care more about this neighborhood than anyone else does." Her attempts to rally support, however, fell mostly flat. Even those who had once tolerated her behavior now found her excuses hollow and self-serving. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained calm and focused, knowing that actions spoke louder than words. She worked closely with the newly formed Oversight Committee to draft clearer guidelines for HOA enforcement, ensuring they left no room for subjective interpretation. The process wasn't easy. There were heated debates, compromises, and late-night discussions, but Evelyn approached it with the same determination she brought to every challenge in her career. Slowly but surely, progress began to take shape. Rules about parking, landscaping, and home modifications were rewritten to prioritize fairness and consistency, replacing the vague language that had allowed Karen to exploit them. As the reforms gained traction, so did accountability. Neighbors continued coming forward with stories of past grievances, each one adding fuel to the growing movement for change. One particularly damning revelation came from a retired teacher named Clara, who shared how Karen had pressured her into repainting her mailbox after claiming its color clashed with the aesthetic of the street. "I spent weeks stressing over it," Clara admitted during a community forum. "But looking back, it was ridiculous. My mailbox wasn't hurting anyone." The tipping point came when local media caught wind of the story. A reporter from the city newspaper interviewed several residents, including Evelyn, whose measured responses painted her as both a leader and a unifier. When asked about her motivations, Evelyn simply said, "This is about creating a neighborhood where everyone feels welcome and respected, not just a privileged few." The article, published online later that week, went viral, sparking conversations far beyond Willow Creek. Readers praised Evelyn for using her position to advocate for justice, while critics called out Karen's behavior as an example of systemic bias masquerading as authority. Back in the neighborhood, the pressure on Karen became unbearable. Complaints poured into the HOA board from residents demanding her removal, citing her divisive tactics and lack of impartiality. At first, the board hesitated, wary of alienating longtime members. But public sentiment was too strong to ignore. After an emergency meeting, they voted unanimously to strip Karen of her role as an HOA enforcer. The decision sent shockwaves through the community, not because anyone was surprised, but because it marked the official end of her reign. For Karen, the loss of power was devastating. She retreated from view, avoiding eye contact with neighbors and skipping subsequent HOA meetings altogether. Rumors swirled that she was considering moving out of Willow Creek entirely, unable to face the judgment of those she had once lorded over. While some felt sympathy for her fall from grace, most agreed it was a necessary step toward healing the neighborhood. As the dust settled, Evelyn reflected on the whirlwind of events. She hadn't set out to dismantle the HOA or make headlines. She'd simply wanted to stand up for what was right. Yet in doing so, she had ignited something bigger, a push for transparency, equality, and mutual respect. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, Evelyn knew one thing for sure. Willow Creek Estates was on the path to becoming a better place for everyone. The ripple effects of Evelyn's actions reached far beyond the boundaries of Willow Creek Estates, sparking conversations that resonated with people across the city and even beyond. The local newspaper article about her confrontation with Karen had struck a chord, igniting discussions about bias and systemic inequities in suburban communities nationwide. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like #FairOAs and #StandWithEvelyn, as readers shared their own stories of HOA overreach and discrimination. For many, Evelyn's courage became a symbol of resistance against the misuse of power, inspiring others to speak out against unfair treatment in their own neighborhoods. Back in Willow Creek, the transformation was undeniable. The reforms spearheaded by Evelyn and the Oversight Committee began taking root, reshaping the way the HOA operated. Clearer guidelines replaced vague rules, ensuring that enforcement was consistent and unbiased. Monthly meetings, once dreaded by residents for their tense atmosphere, became open forums where everyone felt encouraged to voice concerns or suggestions. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves started engaging more, attending gatherings and volunteering for community projects. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to feel less like a collection of houses governed by strict regulations and more like a true community united by shared values. Karen's absence loomed large at first, but it didn't take long for life to move on without her. Some residents admitted feeling a twinge of guilt about how things had ended for her, acknowledging that while her behavior had been harmful, she was still human. Others, however, saw her departure as a necessary step toward progress. "It's not about punishing Karen," Evelyn explained during a casual chat with a neighbor. "It's about making sure no one else has to go through what we did. Accountability isn't personal. It's about creating a better system." Evelyn's leadership extended beyond policy changes. She also worked to foster inclusivity within the neighborhood. She organized monthly potlucks, encouraging families to share dishes that reflected their cultural backgrounds. These gatherings quickly became a highlight for many residents, offering a chance to connect over food, music, and laughter. At one such event, Mr. Patel proudly displayed his Ganesha statue again, this time met with admiration rather than criticism. Angela brought her brother along, introducing him to neighbors who welcomed him warmly. Even Lisa, who had initially been hesitant to attend, found herself laughing alongside Ruth as they swapped parenting tips. The newfound sense of unity didn't mean all challenges disappeared overnight. There were still moments of tension. Old habits die hard. But the difference lay in how they were handled. When disagreements arose, residents turned to dialogue instead of division, guided by the principles of fairness and respect that Evelyn had championed. The HOA board, now more representative of the diverse community it served, took proactive steps to address issues before they escalated. Transparency became the norm, with meeting minutes posted online and decisions made collaboratively rather than behind closed doors. Beyond Willow Creek, Evelyn's story inspired broader change. Local leaders invited her to speak at town halls and panel discussions about equity in suburban governance. Her insights helped shape new policies aimed at preventing similar conflicts in other neighborhoods. Meanwhile, grassroots movements sprang up, urging cities to implement stricter oversight of HOAs to protect homeowners' rights. Evelyn never sought the spotlight, but she embraced her role as an advocate, knowing that her voice could make a difference. As weeks turned into months, Evelyn reflected on how much had changed, not just in Willow Creek, but within herself. Standing up to Karen hadn't been easy, but it reminded her why she had chosen a career in law enforcement, to fight for justice, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. Now, seeing the impact of her actions, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Willow Creek Estates wasn't perfect. It likely never would be, but it was closer to the kind of place where everyone could thrive. One evening, as Evelyn sat on her porch watching Marcus laugh with friends playing basketball in the driveway, she smiled. The sound of their joy mingled with the hum of cicadas and distant chatter from nearby homes. It was peaceful, a quiet reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right can transform not just your corner of the world, but the lives of those around you. And that, Evelyn thought, was worth every challenge along the way. The HOA meeting had become a turning point, not just for Evelyn, but for the entire neighborhood. As she finished speaking and handed out copies of her research, the room buzzed with a mix of shock, anger, and relief. For many residents, it was the first time they'd heard someone call out Karen's behavior so directly, and from someone as respected and credible as Evelyn Carter, no less. The atmosphere shifted palpably. What had started as a tense confrontation transformed into a collective awakening. People who had stayed silent for fear of rocking the boat now felt emboldened to share their own stories. Karen, visibly flustered, tried to regain control of the narrative. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, standing up abruptly. Her voice wavered, betraying her usual air of confidence. "I'm just doing my job here. If we don't enforce the rules, this neighborhood will fall apart." But her words fell flat. Instead of rallying support, they only highlighted how out of touch she was with the community she claimed to protect. A neighbor named Lisa raised her hand hesitantly, then spoke up. "Actually, Karen, I think that's the problem," she said softly but firmly. "Your enforcement feels more like targeting. You've never complained about Tom's RV parked in his driveway for weeks, but when Maria painted her front door blue, you sent her 3 warning letters." Lisa's comment sparked a chain reaction. One by one, other neighbors chimed in, recounting instances where Karen's actions seemed arbitrary, or worse, discriminatory. Mr. Patel, an elderly man who lived 2 streets over, shared how Karen had demanded he remove a small statue of Ganesha from his porch, claiming it was culturally inappropriate. Another resident, a single mother named Angela, recounted how Karen had reported her for having too many cars because her brother occasionally visited, even though the vehicles were always legally parked. Each story added another layer to the growing picture of bias and overreach. Evelyn listened intently, nodding along as each person spoke. She didn't need to say much. Her presence alone gave others the courage to speak up. When the floor opened for discussion, she interjected briefly to steer the conversation toward solutions. "We all want Willow Creek Estates to be a great place to live," she said, her tone measured and diplomatic. "But that means creating rules that are fair and applied equally to everyone. Right now, that's not happening. We need transparency, accountability, and a system that works for all of us, not just a select few." Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of approval from nearly everyone in the room. Even some members of the HOA board looked ashamed, realizing they'd turned a blind eye to Karen's antics for too long. The chairperson, a middle-aged man named Greg, cleared his throat nervously. "Look, maybe we've dropped the ball here," he admitted. "No one wants to live in a place where people feel targeted or unwelcome. Let's figure out how to fix this, together." Karen, sensing the tide turning against her, made one last desperate attempt to defend herself. "You're twisting things," she snapped, pointing a finger at Evelyn. "I'm not the villain here. I'm trying to keep property values up and maintain order." But her protestations only dug her deeper into trouble. Another neighbor, a soft-spoken woman named Ruth, leaned forward and said quietly, "Order doesn't mean oppression, Karen, and property values aren't worth losing our humanity over." By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Karen's reign of intimidation was crumbling. The HOA board announced they would review their policies and create clearer guidelines to prevent future abuses of power. They also agreed to establish a committee, including Evelyn, to oversee enforcement and ensure fairness moving forward. As the meeting adjourned, several residents approached Evelyn to thank her. Some hugged her tightly, tears in their eyes, while others simply shook her hand, expressing gratitude for standing up when no one else dared. Outside, as Evelyn walked back to her car, Marcus greeted her with a proud grin. "That was epic, Mom," he said, giving her a high five. Evelyn chuckled, feeling a wave of satisfaction wash over her. It wasn't just about winning an argument or proving a point. It was about sparking change, showing her neighbors that they deserved better. And as she drove home, she couldn't help but smile. Sometimes justice came in unexpected ways, even in the quiet suburbs of Willow Creek Estates.